Good morning, everybody. Welcome to JM in the AM. Happy 40th, everybody. Happy 40th. We are celebrating the 40th anniversary of JM in the AM, and honestly, it's so amazing and so hard to believe. think back to Erev Rosh Hashanah 1983, the first time I said any words on WFMU's airwaves. A day after, I don't even know if I was officially hired. A day after, it was strongly suggested that I go to the radio station and meet with Dave Kufeld, who trained me. I don't know how many weeks it took for me to actually meet the general manager of WFMU. That was an arrangement that just never happened. The whole story is so insane and crazy, but of course all orchestrated by the one above. And 40 years later, and I got to say this now because I don't want to forget at any point during the show, 40 years later, as I was ready to do what I did for the 39th and the 38th and the 37th and the 36th, which was to just acknowledge on Erev Rosh Hashanah that we were celebrating a major anniversary. 40 years later, Mark Zamek calls me 2 weeks ago, and he says, I'm not allowing this day to go by as just another day, as just another show where you're marking. What do you want, Mark? Where?
You're not going to be seen on the live stream. It's okay.
Where you want. I'm not going to let it go by as a regular mention of an anniversary during a radio show. We have to mark it in some way. And this was all Mark Zamek with some help by Ellie Y. Katz, who is such a leader here in Teaneck, New Jersey, and of course Yaakov here at Poppy's. And I brought in a tremendous support team that includes the legendary Dougie, who seems to be an important cog in every celebration machine that goes on here at JM in the AM. And Mark, I can't thank you enough. I cannot thank you enough for insisting that we do this. It's going to probably be 3+ hours of reminiscence and inside jokes and a whole bunch of trying to figure out which were the best shows of the last 40 years. But all I could say is thank you.
As I sit here at 6:07 in the morning, across from the table with you, with ZK manning the board, and I think the first thing that pops in my mind is the more things change, the more they remain the same.
It is pretty amazing.
It really is. Just to, look back, actually, I commented to my dad yesterday. I think he'll probably make an appearance at some point later.
Nice.
When you look back 40 years, forget about what our lives were 40 years ago. But this week we celebrate on both the secular and the Jewish calendar the 100th anniversary of Daf Yomi. They think when you started doing this show, Daf Yomi was only 60 years old.
That's your point.
Oh my gosh, only 60. Okay, 100. That's when you look back over 40 years, forget all of our lives and the wives and the children and the grandchildren, none of which, were even a glimmer in any of our eyes 40 years ago. It's just, things change and, but really remains
the same. Yeah. But I have to, I made this comment to someone yesterday. And it was funny when I shook your head this morning. I turned to Dougie and I said, "This is the most emotional that this is going to get this morning between me and Mark." But the reality is, I'm so glad Rochelle's here to see this and hear this. And Rochelle, good morning to you. Because she's been, as supportive as a JM wife could possibly be, to say the least. But I made a comment to someone yesterday. With all the people, and there are plenty of people who are going to appear on today's show, plenty. Some of whom are already in this room. With all the people that really can take a good amount of credit for what has gone on over the last 40 years, and there are a lot of them, and it's all legit. A good amount of credit. I'm pointing at ZK because he's among them, So ZK, our chief engineer, is in fact behind the board this morning. Everybody took care of everything for us. But with all the people, the truest partner that I have had for 40 years.
Somebody asked me. It's probably closer to 38 and a half, 39, I think.
Are we getting technical then?
I think we're getting technical.
But if it's truly a partner, and one other thing, there are only a few that could say they've been a partner, and this is why, we'll speak to Matis later on. Right. It's one of the reasons I was really hoping he'd be able to make it this morning, but okay. He'll be checking in with us.
No guilt.
No guilt. He'll be checking with us later on. But really, the two of you, on a complete volunteer basis for 40 years, have been the actual, most incredible partners in this whole pursuit. And like I said, there are plenty of people who've been involved and who also have been volunteers and people who could take credit rightfully for everything that's been going on with this network, etc. But, you think about this incredible team that we have had from the very beginning is just remarkable. Now, Matis does get credit for 40 because
Yes, he was there
predates
before,
me.
sure.
So he certainly gets credit for being a partner for 40 years. But what do I always think about? The other morning between 3 and 4 a.m., I said to myself, someone's going to ask me what the best day was of all these 10,000
Right.
shows, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm kicking myself that I'm thinking of too many recent ones and not thinking back to the old days. But what do I think of?
I don't know if I would use the term best or memorable, I think, because
Right.
memorable might be an easier thing to
But
do.
what do I think of when I think of me and you? What do I think when I think of you? And
All the times that I quit during the marathon?
all the times when you would quit, storm out, and I would say to myself, all right, he'll be back.
Exactly.
I'll make sure to get him back. But anyway, the thing I think of the most is you and I sitting and schmoozing about radio 40 years ago.
In the cafeteria, or are you?
Cafeteria YU, late night in the bunk.
You're still wrong. Ira Fistel was still better than Larry King. I don't care what you say.
This argument that we had for 40 years about Ira Fistel versus Larry King, two completely different styles of radio, and who each one of us preferred. And that's what I think about. And it's unbelievable that from that interest, from that, what ended up being complete love for, this pursuit, it all started with those conversations and with that friendship.
People, people who are close to the circle, I would say, can look at it maybe more objectively. And I think Chaim Hagler once said to me during one of the shows that I happened to be in Masora that you were doing, he said, he doesn't give control of the show to anybody other than, I never saw him allow somebody else to tell him what to do. And I think that at some level, it's certainly the trust that is built over the years. But I think maybe even more fundamentally, it goes back to the fact that our view of the medium and how we use the medium has always been very much in sync in what comes across well. I think that people on the outside really, who just fly in and fly out, don't understand how much thought there is. And I know you definitely, we've discussed this, you second guess yourself much more than I do. I mean, you can sit at 9 o'clock and rip your hair out over, how come I didn't, right, okay. So I don't live my life that way. But I just, I think that as you look back, it's just a matter of learning not only what works, but learning how to articulate what works. And I think that's what I always, I could now, as somebody 40 years later who's a fair bit older, and look back more philosophically over the last 40 years. I think that at the begin, maybe the biggest difference is that at the beginning, we knew what was right, but couldn't articulate it. But now we know what's right.
Yeah,
we can articulate it.
Right. We were able to actually institute policies because we organized our thoughts and our intents, and we were able to formulate, okay, this is what we're doing and why. Early on, it was like it just felt right, or it was,
Correct. It was a feeling. But I remember once, and probably conversations I had with Miriam over the years, when she was producing a lot of the shows, it's trying to tell the story over the course of 3 hours. I remember I did, it was an interesting hybrid role I had. You did a show from TABC once.
Right.
And at the time I was on the board at TABC, wasn't yet president, but on the board at TABC. And TABC ceded control of the show to me, and you ceded control. It was like really an interesting sort of hybrid role. And we had a schedule, and we knew what we wanted to do. And somebody, doesn't matter who, somebody was supposed to come at 7:30, but I think it was Rosh Chodesh that day or whatever, came at 8:45. And I didn't put him on the air. And he was very upset. And, I mean, I didn't have this, it was third-party conversation. It was really, how come, look, you're scheduled for 7:30, it's 8:45, I'm not putting anyone. Yeah, but you lead up. We finished the show that morning with like the 3-star students, right? I'm doing a show trying to tell the story about the school that we love and what the impact it has on our community, what the impact it has over our sons, because all of our children were in this school at the time. And I'm not going to end with a random faculty member. You have to end with the voice of the students. That's how the show has to end. And there is a progress. And I don't think that, certainly 40 years ago, I couldn't have articulated that. But you look back sometimes over the shows that we've done, that we've spent time talking about, that come out completely different than we would have thought. And sometimes people think, so that's the one hand, that how do you plan, how do you tell the story? I do think that more often than not, we or I'm going to say always, but more often than not in this case, no matter what you plan, you're looking to the one above to just drop it in your lap.
Well, he's the ultimate producer, of course.
Correct, the ultimate producer. But even like the shows, like I remember, like, well, of course, in hindsight, one of the most memorable shows was your father's last appearance during that fundraiser. I don't remember the number. You should go look it up. It was like 50 guests on the show. It was like an inhuman number, and we finished on the dot at 9 o'clock. It was an inhuman number because it was during the fundraiser. It had to end up on time. But that was. Look, people came in, I put them on the air. They came in, I put them on the air. It just worked. It was a show like that. You can't plan to be able to tell that story. But so I think that we're just really lucky.
The other thing I wanted to mention, and not to praise you too much, but this is another thing I think is important to point out for those who are looking for friends to help them in different pursuits. And people always ask me, how does this work? So I think one of the most important aspects of this entire thing is that and this really applies to you and Matis the most. It definitely applies plenty to everybody else who's involved. But one of the reasons I cede control of everything to you as opposed to anybody else is I know that the two of you are always operating in my best interest.
Right. Well,
100%.
And I think, and again, not to take away from any other person who's come in or out of the sphere in the last 40 years, but I do think as we look back over 40 years, the two of us just personally never made, I would say never, but really our parnassa and whatever we did outside was not related to the Jewish community really at all.
Correct.
And so it really was here to be the pursuit in your pursuit and the pursuit of the greater good of what the show can do and what the show to accomplish. It was never, we always